Hello, this is Ryan Riccitelli with asnews.net, and I have Pete Cabrinha here. Most of you know who Pete is. He's a legendary waterman, and he's also Cabrinha for Cabrinha kites for those of you who fly those kites. So, Pete, why don't you introduce yourself?
I guess you just did it there for me. My name is Pete Cabrinha, and I'm here in Maui, Hawaii.
Well, and Pete, you're a very humble guy. You've done it all. Professional windsurfer, pretty much pioneer. You are a pioneer tow surfer and kiteboarder. And you have an incredible life over in Hawaii. You live the dream that most people want to live, and what's resulted from that is Cabrinha kites. And why don't you talk a little bit about how that all came together?
A lot of things happen just kind of by necessity. I mean, pretty lucky to be in the ground floor in the windsurfing days. I was a kid, and I was just doing it for fun, and I watched the guys around me that were really pioneering the equipment and passing the stuff off to me to ride. And they had an attitude that was kind of like nothing is crazy. If somebody had an idea, they would just follow through with it, and things like foot straps and cut down boards and pretty soon surfboard shapes and all the pretty much major developments happened in a pretty short span of time. And so sort of going on in life and watching these other sports come around, like tow surfing and kite surfing, I kind of kept that same attitude, and just nothing was too crazy. And when these things came around, by necessity, you just needed to make equipment. And, we just had to make our own because nothing else was out there. You couldn't just go down to a shop and get tow surf equipment or kite surf equipment. And that's kind of how the kite thing started for me. I was making kite boards in a small factory here and wanted to grow the business. And I hooked up with Neil Pride, who obviously has a factory that can make kites, and he wanted to grow or start his kite business, and we got together and did Cabrinha kite surfing.
Well, and I remember years back, actually, I was on Maui, and you unrolled this kite, and it had like the coolest graphics on it, and at that point, you had your choice between like fluorescent green and fluorescent pink and yellow, and then all of a sudden you had this new kite that was really long and skinny, and it had this big old C on it, and I was like, what's that? And you're like, oh, I'm going to make my own kites. And it's been really cool to see Cabrinha grow and become a brand like as big as it has. And I mean, you've gotten to travel quite a bit, and I know you did so with windsurfing, but I mean, what's that been like traveling as a kiteboarder versus traveling as a windsurfer, and also flying the Cabrinha flag?
Well, I can tell you the equipment thing is a lot more fun to travel with kite surfing, that's for sure. I mean, windsurfing took me all over the world, so I got to cover a lot of ground there. Kite surfing, I get to revisit a lot of those other places with a sort of a different approach now. But it's opened up some new places that I never went windsurfing. And like I said, just being able to throw your entire quiver into a small wakeboard-sized bag, harnesses, extra fins, extra gear and all. And it's just, I mean, compared to what we used to travel with, it's incredibly fun.
Well, and we have this new way of, filtering questions, and, there's a lot of questions from our listeners from around the world, and this kind of question kind of goes right now for the interview. It's like there's a guy in Florida, his name's Dr. Lightwind, and he wants to know, at what discipline can we see you again in competition?
I sort of swore off competition because it didn't matter for me anymore. I'm not a grommet anymore by any means, and so I sort of decided a long time ago, anyways, that I didn't want to do it. But then I just got invited to this Wave Invitational in Mauritius, and I got all pumped up on that. And sure enough, the Pride group scheduled a managers meeting right at the same time as that invitational. So I don't think I'm going to be able to make it, but I would have gone to that. That's right down my alley, just surfing. And besides that wave in Mauritius is a left, and I'm a goofy foot, so that was going to bring me out for sure.
Well, and also too, I think you're really well known for just like the travel stories that you do with your team and all the exotic places you go, and the videos that seem to come out from those experiences. And I have to say, it probably must be more relaxing just doing a travel story than competing.
For me, that's what it's all about. I mean, I totally, because I used to be a competitor, I totally see where everybody's coming from and wanting to compete on the tours and stuff. I mean, when you're young and you got skills, you want to show everybody, and you want to knock heads with guys and make a name for yourself. But for me, really, I like the mystique of traveling to crazy places and the possibility to find good waves and experience cultures and stuff. And through kiteboarding, I think there's a lot of that still to be had, and that's really what it's all about for me. Plus, when you open the mags and you have a chance to look at stuff, what do you want to look at? I mean, I think a good part of the people out there reading the media, they want that exotic, travel story. They want to be transported to that place.
Yeah, I agree, and I sometimes have to look at the photos of some of the places you've been, and like some of the shots that have come in over the last couple of years have just been crazy, just like really, really exotic places. So, if you can call that work, man, you better keep on doing that.
Yeah, hey, I got to tell you, I just did probably one of the best trips of my life this summer. I went to the Mentawais on a surf trip, and I actually left the kite gear at home because what I was told was, it's never windy there, and sure enough it was, and it was total glass the whole time. But if you get a chance, if you haven't done it already, you should definitely get down there to the Mentawais. I went on a boat for 11 days, and it was just amazing. I mean, in all respects, the surf was just incredible. The culture is just unbelievable and still relatively untouched, other than the surfing population that comes through there, which is still pretty limited.
Well, and I've seen a lot of photos of you surfing, and there's actually a question from one of our listeners. His name's Ronnie, and he says he wants to know a little bit about you won the Billabong Double XL. I think most people might know that, but if people don't, Pete took home I think $70,000 for getting towed into the biggest wave of the year. This guy wants to know how did they measure the 70-foot wave you won in 2004?
They get a group of guys who are experienced photo editors and big wave surfers, and I think part of it is part science, part voodoo, part gut feeling. They have certain references. They know I'm 5'9", 5'10", and they figure out how to scale myself as many times to measure the size of the wave. The trick is finding the bottom of the wave. In photographs, it can be kind of deceiving, so water shots always help with that. And they have a lot of, usually if you ride a wave that big, there's a couple of camera angles, there's a few video angles on it, so unless you're doing it somewhere off on a secret mission with only one photographer, there's usually some reference for them. So they kind of look at all that stuff, and like I said, they just scale it.
Well, and that was a nice little payday, because that's just another one of your hobbies that you do is obviously the tow surfing, and just went out, just another day that you would be doing that even if you weren't getting paid, and somebody took a photo and you ended up taking home $70,000. That's not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all.
Well, anyway, there's a crew in Half Moon Bay, California, Live to Surf. They're basically, they got a bunch of surf questions here, and I'll just kind of try to rattle some of the ones off to you. And it says, what would you recommend to a fellow surfer to get the most surf feel from kiteboarding, equipment-wise? For example, like a directional board, a mutant, or a twin tip?
Gosh, we don't even call them directional boards anymore. I would recommend just to go get a surfboard.
There we go.
That's where kite surfing has gone. It's come full circle, and especially with the new kites, the bow kites like the Crossbow and the Switchblade, you can surf waves exactly like you surf them without a kite, because you can power up when you want and depower when you want. And so you can ride a fuller, bigger volume board like a surfboard. I personally, I ride my 5.2 tow board. It's about 16 and a half wide, and for me that's perfect, because you can really gouge turns. You can really stomp on the rail and really get some projection out of your turns for sure.
And you've been doing that for years. I mean, I've seen you in Maui just riding normal surfboards. You've had straps on some, and some were strapless. And that's kind of been, I mean, that's what I've seen most of the guys do over there is ride just those type of boards. And it's interesting that you say that. Just go get a surfboard, and because it's a lot of people always are asking twin tips, directionals, and that's where we've gone is full circle.
The surf, I would say definitely just get on a surfboard. I mean, when you're riding, especially when you're riding onshore waves, a twin tipping can be kind of fun. It's a bit like motocross. There's a lot of ramps and a lot of hits to be creative on and stuff. But if you get on any kind of a real wave, then man, the surfboard is where it's at right now. And it's not just a trend. It's like this movement. It's bringing in surfers who are finally seeing what can be done, and they're like, hey, that's exactly what I do. It's like having your private tow surfing driver 24/7. It's I don't know. I can't talk enough about it right now.
Here's another question. It kind of goes along with that. It says there's a picture of you releasing a kite after using it to tow into a big right at Jaws. Please comment on that event from the standpoint of cost, performance, and social responsibility. I don't know about the social responsibility. I don't think people realize that when you're out at Jaws and you're doing something like that, you have a bunch of support. But why don't you talk about that? Just like the whole aspect of you towing into a wave with a kite.
It's one of those things. It's like, photograph doesn't tell the whole story, so it's that one falls under the don't try this at home.
Yeah, for sure.
I was riding all day up at Jaws. I went up with my partner Rush, and he took his foil board to surf, and I took my kite board to kite, and we had one jet ski. So when he was, I tow him in foil boarding, and then when he was all done and the wind picked up, I pumped up my kite and went kiteboarding. And I just kite surfed the whole afternoon, and when I was done, I thought, well, I'm done, and nobody's here. I'm going to try tow in on a couple and just let the kite go and surf them. And so I did that, and after I'd kick out on the wave, Rush would come get me, and then we go way downwind and fetch the kite. That's the good thing about Jaws is that there's a pretty big channel downwind. So we'd fetch the kite and untangle the lines and everything, and then go back up and do it again. And I managed to do it about, 2 or 3, maybe 4 times before on one release the lines just were like ridiculously tangled. So
here's another question from Live to Surf. Derek Dorner, Laird Hamilton, Buzzy Kerbox, Dave Kalama, and many others who you've tow surfed with. How many of these guys have gotten into kiteboarding?
Well, all those guys you just mentioned all got into kiteboarding, and all can do it, to a pretty high level. I would say they don't do it as much as the core guys here, but they definitely will pick it up here and there, and especially like Kalama, he'll throw a kite on his canoe and do some kite canoeing and stuff. So the object is to have as many toys as you can. I mean, that's really what it's all about. And everybody you just mentioned there has a lot of toys in their quiver, and kiteboarding is definitely one of them.
Well, and here's a more, philosophical question from these guys. They say, what's your experience and opinion on the interactions and coexistence between kiters and surfers? I mean, what is the vibe like over in Maui between kiters and surfers?
It's totally cool. Probably for the main reason that they don't really happen in the same places, other than the outer reefs. And when it's windy to kite, the surfers usually go in anyway. So that's kind of the beauty of it. They're so complementary, for one thing. I mean, you can surf in the morning, and then when the wind picks up, you can go surf that same wave with your kite. So the vibe is good, and I think the surfers are really down with what's going on, and it's like I said, it's a movement. There's a lot of people gravitating towards it.
Well, here's an interesting question from a guy, Scott M. He talks about, your relationship with Robbie Nash from windsurfing, and even at one time working for Nash Sales. What's it been like to be competitors in the kite business? And do you ever join up for kite sessions or discuss and try out each other's products?
The relationship with Nash is pretty interesting for us. They're located here as well, in Maui, so in a lot of cases we're testing product in the same vicinity, so we kind of get to see what's going on, they get to see what's going on. But the one thing I will say, it's kind of nice having Rob on the other end there, because you can actually put a face to the competition, and you can sort of get behind their philosophies, just because I know Rob, and I know where he's coming from. Some of these other brands, I don't exactly know what their MO is. I don't. It seems like one day it's this, and the next day it's that. And with Rob, it's good. I mean, I don't think we're taking any food off of his plate, and vice versa. I think it's working out pretty well.
Well, here's another interesting question, and it kind of gets back to what you ride, and you talked about what surfboard you ride, but this guy, his name is Pim, says, what board do you ride in waves, and which kite is the best in waves, the Crossbow 2 or the Switchblade 2?
Crossbow 2. That's my hands down favorite, and that's what everybody seems to gravitate to. It's fast turning, it's got a really fast depower and repower, and that's what you want for surfing in the waves with the kite. You want something when you want the power, it's there immediately. When you want to get rid of it, you want it to happen immediately, and that's what the Crossbow is really good for. I'm always riding with straps. I ride mainly a 5.2. It's my basically straight off of my toe board that I ride at places like below jaws levels, like big outer sprecs or whatnot. You'd be surprised how big of a wave you can actually ride on a board that size. And the other one is a 5.9, which is a little bit more surfy-like. It's a little bit rounder, a little bit wider.
Well, and someone actually, just to follow up on that, a guy, Pab, he said he wants to know, why doesn't Cabrinha have a kiteboard dedicated to wave riding? That's been the $1,000,000 question for some time now. Actually, you guys should keep your eyes open, because we're just about to roll out with a whole new division called Cabrinha Surf, and we'll be coming out with some pretty incredible surf products, and these are just core surfing products for toe surfing, for surfing, and there you'll find what you're looking for. And I can't say too much about it right now, but all I can say is you'll know when it rolls out. That's really exciting to hear, Pete. I mean, so that's like one of the main questions that we were barraged with is like, when are you guys coming out with the surfboard? So that's exciting to be dropped here on asnews.net that Cabrinha is coming out with some new gear.
Yeah, well, you can actually get the surfboard right now today if you go to Neil Pride Maui's website. You can get the 5.2, the same one that I ride, but by middle of next month, we're going to roll out with the rest of the surf line, and there's some pretty interesting things in there that I think you guys are going to be really stoked about.
Well, it's basically going to be your toy chest.
I'll definitely give you a heads up, Ryan. You'll know when.
It's your toy chest, though, isn't it, Pete?
What's that?
It's your toy chest.
Yeah, for sure.
So, let's switch gears and let's talk about kites, because there's a ton of questions from our listeners about kites, and we've got. Here's a good one to start out. Why did Cabrinha stop making the sea kite? Although the performance might appeal to most people, there's still a sector of riders who prefer the poppy, fast-turning power generated by a sea kite, and that's from a guy named Joker. But I mean, that's a question asked by a lot of people. Like, what's the deal on that?
Yeah, I knew I was going to get into this corner because I can't talk too much about what's coming out next month, but all I can say at this point is that everything anybody liked in a sea kite, they're going to have in one of our new kites with all the things that the bow kite offers. All the depower, all the safety, but everything that they ever loved about a sea kite. So now there really is no reason to buy a sea kite anymore. depower.
You know, I'm going through this, and as I see is like all these, most of these questions, a lot of them are the same about, you know, like what's going on with the sea kite, what's happening, what's going to come out next. And I don't want to put you in the corner with about the switchblade. I don't want to make you talk about things that you don't, you know, that we really can't talk about here on asnews.net. But I do want to filter through some of these questions. You know, let's see. Here's an interesting one from a guy named Took Yank, and I know this will probably hit you from left field, but it says, with the rapid growth of kiting, there's also a rapid growth of potential for injuries and subsequent lawsuits against the kite producers. And basically, his first question is this a serious threat to the business? I mean, that is a common question. Everybody kind of wonders that.
Yeah, it's ever present, and you know, things do happen. But here's the good news: is that, you know, with these new type of kites, it's definitely reducing the risk liability for sure, and I'm 100% convinced of that. I mean, and this is part of the reasons why we don't make sea kites, just traditional sea kites or fifth line kites, is because here's the bottom line. I mean, for one thing, I love the bow kite for its performance. You know me, I'm not afraid to take risks, and so I'll ride whatever I think is the best to ride, and I think the bow kites are the best performing kites out there. But that being said, you know, one of the integral parts of the design is, and one of the byproducts of the design is how safe it is. And, you know, 90% of the injuries that happen on land during the launch process, or getting from the launch to the water, or coming in. You know, very few of the real serious injuries actually happen on the water. And so what happens in most cases, somebody botches the launch, or they get lofted or something on land, and if they have a sea kite or a fifth line kite, what they have to do in most cases is they have to physically reach for some handle that they have to activate in order to depower the kite. The beauty about the bow kites is you push the bar away and it happens instantaneously. And so you can avoid most of the accidents before they even happen with the bow kite. And that's why I really feel that the sport has gotten a lot safer, and we're really minimizing the risk to people, and therefore minimizing our exposure to liability.
Well, you know, that's interesting, and, you know, here's an interesting question to follow up with that, because you're right. I mean, with the school that we run down here, it's just so much easier to teach a beginner on a you know, a flat kite or a bow kite or whatever you want to call it, and then just even seeing, you know, other people go out who struggle in high winds, and they go out there and just ride effortlessly, and it just, you know, I don't want to paint a false sense of security, but they are very safe kites, and they've changed kiteboarding. I don't think anybody can deny that.
Well, I mean, funny enough, there are a lot of people that are, and a lot of those people are people that are continuing to manufacture sea kites. And I think what the public has to understand, you know, behind a lot of the words that come out of some of these brands, or some of these people who are manufacturing these sea kites still, is that, you know, there's other motives as well for not going the route of the bow. I mean, there is a patent on the bow kite, and if you want to be legit, you know, you should take a license and you know, pay a royalty on it, and that makes the kite cost a little bit more and reduces your profit. I mean, you could make a sea kite, which you know, the patent has expired, and you know, perhaps make a little bit more money on it. But you know, we're not about that. We just want the best kite that's out there. I think the people have to understand. I mean, they should really sort of lift the hood up a little bit and see why some companies are still really hanging on to this sea kite thing. You know, sure, there's a lot of people that do love the feel of it, but starting next month, there's really going to be no reason to stick with it.
Well, and here's an interesting question from Dr. Lightwind out of Florida again. He says, don't you think kite surfers should be able to be completely independent so they can self-launch and land anywhere on their own?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you think we're going to move anywhere towards this in the future?
You know, I would say, yeah, there's a couple things in the way of that. I mean, if you've got a sand beach, definitely you can launch and land on your own. I mean, that's already a reality. It comes down to places where there's rocky shorelines like lakes and some oceans and some beaches where you don't have the luxury of actually laying your lines out. And I just had that last week. I tried to ride a surf spot over here, and it was nothing but lava. And, I mean, we were just trying everything we could to try to get the kite launched and, as safe as possible. Unfortunately, everything went well, but, you don't always have the luxury of sand everywhere.
This is true, and you can't make a sport like I've always said this when anybody tries to make like a sport like kiteboarding safe. I mean, the fact is it's kiteboarding. I mean, you can make it safer, but it's an extreme sport, and with that comes the risks. That's where all the common sense is needed. So with that, there's another question here, and I don't mean to put you in a corner, but someone wants to know, Smokey from Wasaga Beach, Canada, do you think it was irresponsible for Cabrinha to sell the original bow kite design without a kite leash?
No, we don't. Actually, we feel that your first line of defense with the bow kite is the way that it depowers. And, we actually sold the leash as an accessory, so we provided to the people that did want it. There was a while there that the only people that really wanted to use the leash were the guys that were doing handle passes. Because they saw that they could depower the kite on their own. Now, a lot of people like to ride with the leash as just sort of an extra bit of security, like myself. I mean, I always ride with the leash, so now we include the leash with the kites.
Well, and this same person has another question about your dump valves, and I use Cabrinha kites. I use the Switchblade 2, and you have that valve. What's the story behind that?
We all like the airlock. We really listen to everybody, and there's sort of two sides to every story, and one of them has to outweigh the other one, and the positive feedback definitely outweighs the negative. So, we've stuck with it, and there's some really good benefits to the airlock for sure.
The airlock's cool. I like the airlock. I know that one of my friends, he has the airlock, and then he also has the valve, a normal traditional valve, and we use like an air tank here, so it's hard to fill it up. It's our lazy factor, but that's why we like using the crossbows here, is we're able to air them up easier. But no, it's a very convenient feature. I mean, when we're on a boat and we're trying to pump up the kites, it's so much easier just to like have the one-way valve and push an air into it. But it's interesting because our listeners, they get very, very detailed in these questions, and a lot of their feedback is right on target if you're actually out there in the trenches using this stuff.
Yeah.
Toby from Kite Forum, he has some questions for you. Here it is. It's what was your first thought when Bruno Lugano presented the bow concept to you?
It was something that I was looking for a long time. I always thought that the idea of just pushing the bar away to get total depower was really what I wanted. And when Bruno brought this to us, he actually shopped it around to a few of the brands. And the first day I rode it, I was like, well, this thing feels definitely different, but I like it. And the guys that tested it with me, even my own development team, they were of the mind that, well, it feels a little too different, I mean, are people going to like this different feel? And I was just all for it. I just immediately loved it, and I saw, the potential for me anyways. I said, I at least want this one of these kites in the line, if for nothing else, just for myself. And then the second day I rode it, and the third day I rode it, and the fourth day I rode it, I just, every day I fell more and more in love with it. And, it was no hesitation for us to pursue it.
So, and he has another question too. Do you pay Bruno a patent on this kite, and how does that work?
It works similar to the old arrangement. Bruno has a patent on the bow kite, and we pay him a royalty.
Here's another question that's interesting. Here we are on a podcast, and what do you think about the internet, like forums, etc., and what is it doing to our sport, in your opinion?
I think they're cool. I think they're really cool. I mean, if nothing else, they provide a lot of entertainment for a lot of people. They can be a time killer, and they can be a place where a lot of misinformation gets put out. But I think in the end, the correct information, wins over. Because for every person that speculates about something, there'll be a couple of people who are in the know who will get in there and set the record straight. And so I think in the end, if you weed through all the posts and the guys that got their haterade going,
their haterade,
then you get to what you're looking for. I think there's some really good information out there, and the good and bad of it is a lot of times stuff gets out there prematurely if we're working on something that we don't really want to show everybody. It gets out there, but on the other hand, when you do want people to see it, it's instant, and that's the beauty of it, is that you can get a lot of information out in a short amount of time.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see how many people actually go and search for your new boards tomorrow when this thing goes live. I think Paul Menta, we had him on here, and he said he's never gotten so many hits on his website until he got his interview on with us. So it'll be interesting to see how much reach we actually have. Here's an interesting question from Toby. How many riders ask you a day to become a team rider?
It doesn't happen on a daily basis, but we get a lot of people who come to us for support, for sure. I think the funniest one I've ever gotten, though, was a girl that came up to me during her lesson, and she says, "Hey, actually, I launched her kite for her, and I didn't even know who she was. She was taking a lesson. I threw her kite up in the air, and on her way to the water, she introduced herself in kind of a hurry and said, 'Hey, remember me, because I'm going to come for you. I'm going to come to you for sponsorship in 6 months.'" And I'm like, right on. I like that attitude, She was just learning it. She was like calling it out. And sure enough, man, she's a pro rider now. I won't say who this is, but she's a full-on pro and seems to be doing pretty well. But she had it from the beginning. She knew what she wanted.
Well, that's pretty cool, man. There's so many up-and-coming young people who are so passionate about kiteboarding, and it's obviously you've been in since the beginning. And I mean, could you ever have imagined that it would grow to be as big as it is today?
I don't want to say that I knew it, or I don't want to say I called this a long time ago or anything like that. But definitely, like I said earlier in the program, just having been through the windsurfing and saw what happened there, and been through the tow surfing thing, even the beginning of tow surfing when everybody seemed to be against it. There was a pretty big tide of negativity towards tow surfing in the beginning, and that totally turned itself around. That by the time kite surfing came around, I think I had the feeling like, hey, this is another one of those things that has the potential. I mean, none of us had the crystal ball to see where it is today, but we all knew it definitely had the potential.
Well, you know what? There's a lot of gear talk here, and I'm going to pepper you with some of these gear questions, and some of these questions are, I've read them before, and they make sense to me, but we'll have to try and make them sense as we're talking here. This one's an interesting one about the new Contra kite versus the crossbow. He says, his name's Ronnie, he says, "I have a 14 Contra and a 9 crossbow. The 17 Contra fits well to the 12-meter kites, and the 12-meter Contra to the 9-meter kite. But with the 14 Contra, you have to choose between the 9 and the 12, neither of them which seem ideal. Are there plans to make a 10.5 to match the 14 Contra?"
Whoa.
Did you catch that?
But this is the idea behind the Contra. The Contra was made to be your biggest kite, and so I really think that if you have a 14 Contra as your biggest kite, then you could drop down to, let's say, a 12 crossbow as your next size, and there's a really good parity there. If you had a 17 Contra as your biggest kite, you could drop down to the 14 as your next biggest kite, and there'd be a good parity there as well.
I flew the 14 Contra. I flew Damien Leroy's when he was here, and he told me that I should go out on. I thought I should be out on a 12, and he's like, "I'll just take it." And that kite has so much power, and it's actually Tony Brady flies the 14 down here, and he swears by the 14 Contra as a light wind kite. So these kites.
People, the 14 is going to be their biggest kite.
Yeah, and here's an interesting question too from Luis Nuno from Brazil, and it's kind of along with this the Contra question. Looking at the Cabrinha's charts, the new Contra 17 is promoted to go in 4 to 5 knots. Do you really see anyone riding with this amount of wind? And what do you think the fun factor is in such minimal conditions?
I severely doubt anybody's actually riding in 4 to 5 knots unless they're on snow. What you have to look at on those charts is the optimum wind range, which is actually the darker red area in it. I mean, you could be flying the kite in the 4 to 5 knots, but unless it's perfectly steady, perfectly flat, and you're on a really big board, I doubt many people are going to be riding in that kind of wind. I mean, for most people, it starts at about 8. I mean, that's really where the riding is. The 17 doesn't allow anybody to ride in any less wind. It's just made for a bigger person to ride in that light wind. Well,
and I probably murdered Ronnie's question, but I think you cleared it up. And I think you're right. A lot of it's just common sense too. It's like it's only fun. It's only fun if you're having fun, and if you're not having fun, then go paddle out and go surfing.
I mean, you'd be surprised what a big board will do to your session.
That's true. I mean, we're in San Diego, where I'm from. I mean, you'd be surprised on what a normal day of kiteboarding is for a lot of these people. I mean, literally, it's going and riding downwind and walking upwind. They spend half their time walking upwind, and then the other half the time riding downwind. And so, and really, the smallest kite's a 21-meter kite. So the sport is so different everywhere, and I mean, in some places that is the reality. You're going to be just on a big 6-foot surfboard. So here's another real interesting question about the crossbow. It says, did you perceive that with the launch of the crossbow that it would stifle the sea kites, and that you would see such a big response from the industry?
Yeah, I mean, stifle's a good word. I didn't think anything was going to happen overnight. I know how these things are. I mean, we're looking at a good 6 years of an industry making sea kites, and we're looking at a good 6 or 7 or 8 years of a lot of these pro riders cultivating their style on sea kites. So I didn't expect anybody to just change overnight. But what we see happening now is this massive migration to the bow kites, for all the reasons we keep speaking about. They're just better performing, and they're much safer, and they're just more logical. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to make any claims. I didn't see it happening overnight, but I definitely knew that the bow kites were going to take off where the sea kites left off. Let's say. I mean, we've gotten everything we needed to get out of the sea kites, and the bow kites are where it's at.
Well, here's another interesting question about the new. Let's see. It says, why did Cabrinha integrate the new Sprint single-point inflation system on the new Contra and Crossbow 2, and is the Sprint that different from other single inflation systems? That's a good question.
Well, for one thing, it's convenient. I mean, I love it, and it's different in a few ways. For one, we have the airlock, so the airlock integrates nicely with the whole Sprint system. But one of the other ways that it's kind of nice is it's pretty user friendly. If something does go wrong and you need to swap out bladders or something, it's not this nightmare. It's really straightforward. The other thing that's cool about it is that the tubes that connect the leading edge to the strut, they don't have to be zip tied on. They have these couplings that hold them on. So that's just one less thing that you need to have at the beach. You don't have to carry a bunch of zip ties in your car. So we tried to keep it as pretty simple as possible. And trust me, we went the other way in the beginning. Which might be why it took us so long to actually, get this far. We had this really elaborate system, and we decided to ditch it for user friendliness and simplicity.
Well, and you know what? Here's another great question from, I don't know who sent this in, but it says, the Crossbow 2 has a completely different flying profile than the original Crossbow. How does it differ, and what does it accomplish?
Yeah, well, because we only had a certain amount of time on the bow kites originally, we found that the original crossbows were very powerful, but they didn't fly as fast through the sky as we wanted them to. That was one of the things on the hit list for the Crossbow 2. So we just implemented these faster flying profiles, which gets the kite from A to B a lot faster. It just makes it much more efficient, and that's what we did.
The new control system has been modified substantially, and what changes were made, and why did Cabrinha do away with the power lock system?
Well, the way the bow kite's depowered, the power lock doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you're just hooking in the middle of a jump for hang time. For just riding, the power lock on a bow kite makes very little sense. The kites like to be constantly the angle of attack changing constantly with the wind and with the chop and with the gusts and everything. And if you try to lock it off at a certain speed for too long, then it just chokes it up. It doesn't allow it to fly forward like it should. So we did away with the power lock, and that bought us some ability to also reduce the diameter of the bar, which leads it into where we are at today with the new style of riding. I mean, everybody wants to do unhooked riding with grabbing to the middle of the bar, and by not having a power lock, they've got a nice grip there.
Here's from another listener. They say the bow kites have received criticism for not being good for unhooked riding, or for those who like powerful wake style riding tricks. Do you think these style of kites are good for this type of rider? Basically, yeah. I mean, what's your take on that? I mean, most people say that unhooked riding is really tough with the flat kites.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, originally, it's such a different feel that it took a lot of getting used to, and the way the bow kite, the difference between power and depower, or let's say hooked and unhooked, the power changes quite a bit, and so it took a lot for the people to get used to it. But if you look at the guys who know how to use it, especially our riders, of course, who have committed to it, talk to Dre, talk to Susie, and talk to Peter, and talk to the Richmond kids, and they'll tell you that they can do so much more with it than they could with a classic kite. And without giving away too much, the stuff that's coming down the pipeline again will just blow people's mind for unhooked riding. It's really of everything that's out there.
There's a guy, Jim, in the Gorge, and we've talked a lot about the crossbows, the Contras, and he has a question about the switchblades. He likes the switchblades better, and he wants to know what's up with the Switchblade 2. And I know that I'm not really supposed to talk about that with you, but I figured I'd ask.
Yeah, I'd love to talk all day about it right now, but I can't give up the details. I think I've alluded to what's happening with it. But if I start to talk about it anymore,
I don't want to get you in trouble, man.
Telling you, I'm going to give up too many details.
Well, that's what I try to do here. That's my job. I'm trying to get that information out of you. We had Tony Lagosha on here last week, and we were just picking his brain about the new Link kite, and so it's all right. That's part of the harassment that you have to take here on asnews.net. So. Here's another question for you. How do the different bridle systems on the Contra and the Crossbow 2 differ, and how do the differences affect the performance?
Well, the main difference people are going to feel is the less bar pressure. We've balanced them a little bit different to lighten the bar pressure a bit, and that's the main thing they're going to feel. Well,
and people always say I never criticize my panel guests, and so here's a question it comes from Berlin, from Any Kiting. He says, Any Kiting from Berlin doesn't think Cabrinha's production boards and harnesses are up to par with its kites. What are your thoughts on this, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, he's got every right to say that. I'll admit it. We've in the past made boards at a factory in Taiwan, and we struggled with getting exactly what we wanted out of that factory. We've just moved factories to a factory in Europe which has a state-of-the-art manufacturing, and we're coming out with a whole new board program. This is part of this the September launch I'm talking about, I think people are going to be pretty excited to see what we have. Things have changed, and we're definitely in the game. We feel like we have the best kites in the industry, and we're struggling with this factory to just bring the boards up to the level that I'd feel happy with, and we're right there. You know, the new boards are insane.
Yeah, I'm excited to see some of these new surfboards that you're going to be pumping out here. I imagine they're going to be really good, and they're probably going to get a lot of people on the water. You know, here's an interesting question about, it says, you know, you switched the way your boards were made this year, and also the way of the kites, the flat seams. You went to a flat seam. Why did you guys switch on, I guess, your seam structures on your kites?
For one, it's just a little easier to assemble at the factory, and also the flat seam reduces the amount of thickness in the folded seam. We went from having something like 20 layers at the seam once you fold it all down to, I think, 12 layers. So it just makes it much stronger.
Well, you know, some of the questions that my listeners have for you, I mean, they're the last thing that I would think of, so I apologize if I've murdered some of these questions, but, you know, they are good questions, and I try to filter everybody's, you know, questions to you. I'm sorry to be peppering you with some of these, but, you know, there are some good ones amongst all these. And
well, you know, if I didn't answer them here, I'd probably find a way to get them answered online. It's good stuff, and I'm glad everybody's so interested, you know.
Yeah, you know, here's a real, you know, crazy talk. That's what we called it last time when I had Tony on here. You know, it's like I asked him, has your design team come up with anything, you know, that's so wild that it just can't be released to the public?
You know, I think we've got a good combination of creativity and level-headedness. I mean, we don't like to waste our time with anything that's just too out there. But I gotta say, you know, there's a lot of people out there who send stuff our way or send ideas our way, and there's people thinking about a lot of stuff. I mean, there's some pretty interesting ideas and concepts out there floating around. So yeah, we see these things and we evaluate them sometimes and decide on whether they're worth pursuing, at least for a little while, or not. And sometimes we do. We pursue things and see that they're not really going anywhere, or they're not really what the consumer wants, and we drop them. But you know, that's the fun part of the job for me and for my team is getting in there and making the stuff.
Well, you know, here's a cool question, and you know, after this, I'll give you a chance to throw some shouts out because I feel like we've just really we've covered a lot of stuff today. Here's a good question. So what do you think our biggest growth opportunities are in kiteboarding, and what do you think are our biggest challenges?
I think one of the big growth opportunities is in surfing, for sure. You know, that I think that's definitely where a lot of gains can be made in getting people on board. One of the biggest challenges, again, is launching space and beach access. That's always going to be a challenge for us. And people doing, you know, not very smart things. And, you know, I mean, there's always going to be accidents. People are going to get hurt by just a sheer accident. And then there's people that are going to get hurt just doing really stupid things. And that's always going to, I think, limit our access, because those are the kind of things that get, you know, they make the papers, and they're pretty sensational, you know.
Well, I have a question for you. Like who's your favorite rider these days, man? Like the up-and-coming crew.
I have a lot, man. I mean, you know, I don't want to call him old school by any means, but Elliot LeBeau is always impressive in the surf. Guy just murders it. The Richmond kids are really doing some cool stuff. I like those guys. They've got a real open mind, and you know, nothing is considered gay or weird or whatever. They just try it, you know, and just see what happens. Like they'll get way up in the air and just start flinging and passing and looping, and they do some very cool stuff. You know, I'm always impressed with Dre. I love riding with the guy. Susie's great, both on and off the water. She's just a really cool girl. I don't know. One of our Russian riders, this guy Peter, is ripping, just really killing it. Yeah, I'm always going to shout out to my guys because they're the guys that I watch ride a lot. But Damien, fully rips, and
yeah, for sure. The Richmond brothers, you mentioned something about they're open-minded and stuff, and I've watched a lot of growth in kiteboarding, and I think the new crew is at a different time, and it's just the mindset. They're very open-minded, and as they're just willing to do anything. And as they are out there, going around, they're winning money, man. These kids came here. I mean, Sean took home $4,000 for winning the border cross here.
Yeah, no doubt.
He went. They both went over to King of the Bay, and they won money there too. And their family's behind it, and it's just cool. And I know you guys are really behind those kids too. And I just want to say, thanks for coming on today and giving us a chance to really pick your brain. I know a lot of people will listen to this and they'll really appreciate your feedback. But we also want to give you a chance to, throw a shout out to your crew.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody. Thanks for all the people supporting us for sure. And thanks for my team. I'm pretty lucky. I think I've got an excellent team of guys and girls who put their hearts into it, and they're definitely not doing it for the money. They do it because they love the sport, and they want to make sure that everybody's getting the right stuff. And for my family to just hanging in there.
Well, and you're headed off to Hong Kong.
Yeah, going to Hong Kong tomorrow.
The life of Pete Cabrinha. Well, man, thanks for coming on the show, and we'll get you back on here. And that's the goal. Is you have a direct line with us. If you guys have something cool that's coming out, let us know. We'll definitely get you on, and we'll get more questions from the world.
Right on.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Pete.
Yeah, good talking to you, Ryan.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take it easy.